It began long before the first shot was fired. In the quiet corridors of universities and laboratories, curiosity had already turned into competition. Scientists across Europe were racing toward the future, and the world did not yet understand that their discoveries would soon be fed to the machinery of war. By the late 1930s, equations were weapons in disguise. When the clouds of conflict gathered over Europe, governments did not only mobilize armies, they mobilized intellect. Physicists, chemists, biologists, psychologists, and doctors were summoned by their nations. Each promised that their knowledge could save lives or secure victory. Some believed in duty. Others simply wanted funding for research. Few realized the moral abyss opening beneath their feet. Inside hidden basements and steel bunkers, science changed shape. Laboratories became factories of endurance, pain, and power. Every discovery was measured not in benefit to mankind, but in tactical advantage. A medical advance could be turned into a tool of torture overnight. A chemical experiment could become a battlefield in a bottle. In Germany, research was centralized under the regime's obsession with superiority. The search for the perfect soldier consumed endless resources. Doctors tested stimulants designed to keep men awake for days. Pervitin, a crystal compound that erased exhaustion but devoured the mind. At first, it seemed miraculous. Soldiers marched farther, shot straighter, feared nothing. Then came the collapse, the trembling hands, the hallucinations, the silent deaths. The same drug that promised victory became an invisible enemy. Elsewhere, in the frozen laboratories of the East, Unit 731 in Japanese-occupied Manchuria pushed the boundary of cruelty beyond imagination. Under the euphemism of epidemic prevention, prisoners were exposed to plague, cholera, frostbite, and vivisection without anesthesia. Data was gathered meticulously. Temperature of death, time of infection, rate of decay. To the scientists in white coats, each life was a variable. To history, each life was a scream that never reached the sky. Not all atrocities wore foreign uniforms. Across the Atlantic, research accelerated in the name of defense. British laboratories experimented with chemical agents to neutralize nerve gas. American psychologists studied the limits of obedience and fear long before ethics committees existed. When the Manhattan Project emerged from the desert sands of New Mexico, it carried humanity across a threshold it could never return from. The split atom became the symbol of both genius and guilt. Inside those secret cities, brilliant minds worked under pressure unlike any before. They lived in silence, unable to tell their families what they were creating. Some believed they were building peace through deterrence. Others whispered that they were crafting the end of the world. When the first atomic fire illuminated the desert night, several scientists turned away, not from the light, but from what it revealed about themselves. "Now I am become death," one murmured, quoting scripture. It was less a declaration than a confession. Meanwhile, medical breakthroughs emerged from necessity and nightmare alike. Blood transfusion methods improved because soldiers bled faster than doctors could replace them. Penicillin was mass-produced to save millions, even as new biological weapons were tested to kill with unseen precision. In makeshift surgical tents, young medics invented techniques that would become modern trauma medicine. For every life stolen by experimentation, another was spared by innovation. War had become the most perverse teacher in human history. Across Europe, children scavenged metal scraps for munitions. Women replaced men in factories, welding steel until their hands cracked. Entire economies were redesigned for destruction. The rhythm of production echoed the heartbeat of the front lines. One tank every hour, one bullet every second. Science had fused with industry, and together they forged a monster that fed on progress. But progress does not stop when conscience sleeps. Even in darkness, there were sparks of humanity. Some scientists risked execution to sabotage their own projects, falsifying data, delaying results, mislabeling shipments. They fought not with weapons, but with equations rewritten to fail. History rarely names them, yet their quiet defiance saved countless lives. In the middle of madness, they remembered that discovery without ethics is destruction, disguised as genius. By 1944, the world had become a vast laboratory. The Arctic tested endurance. The oceans tested machinery. The skies tested physics. Every element of creation was being studied for annihilation. And still, curiosity endured. The same human drive that once painted caves now split atoms. The tragedy of the 20th century was not that humanity lost its intellect. It was that intellect lost its heart. When the final guns fell silent, the world exhaled, but the breath carried fallout. From the ashes of burned cities rose the age of antibiotics, jet propulsion, nuclear energy, and rocket science. Operation Paperclip brought hundreds of German scientists to the United States. Others vanished behind Soviet walls. The Cold War was born not from ideology, but from inherited data. Notes taken in blood, equations written in suffering. The war had proven a terrible truth. Knowledge cannot be contained. Once discovered, it demands to be used. The same chemistry that made gas chambers produced modern anesthesia. The same physics that leveled Hiroshima powered satellites that orbit above us today. Every comfort of the modern age carries a shadow from those hidden laboratories. Science survived the war, but innocence did not. The world entered a new era, one that would forever question whether progress is worth the price it asks. And as humanity looked toward the stars, the ghosts of those experiments remained, whispering through the wires and circuits of the civilization they helped create. This was the forgotten science, the one that promised to save humanity, yet forever changed what it means to be human. When the war ended, the world was left standing in the ruins of its own genius. Laboratories once hidden beneath concrete were emptied. Glass beakers still smelled of chemicals. Chalkboards were covered in unsolved equations, and pages of notes fluttered in the wind like leaves of a tree that had grown too fast. The soldiers went home, but the scientists were divided between victors. Their loyalty no longer belonged to nations. It belonged to survival. In 1945, Operation Paperclip began quietly, almost invisibly. More than 1,600 German engineers, doctors, and physicists were transported to the United States. Some had designed rockets that rained fire on London. Now they would build machines to reach the stars. Among them was Werner von Braun, whose dream of spaceflight had been born in the shadows of V-2 missiles. To many, he was a visionary. To others, a war criminal disguised as a pioneer. America chose to see the dream, not the darkness behind it. Across the ocean, the Soviets launched their own mission, Operation Oso Aviaki. Thousands of specialists were taken east, many with families held as hostages to ensure obedience. Laboratories in Moscow, Kiev, and Siberia swelled with captured knowledge. The Cold War had not yet begun, but its first weapons were not bombs. They were ideas. In Japan, Unit 731 was erased from official history. Documents vanished overnight. Witnesses were silenced. In exchange for data, some of its leaders were granted immunity by foreign powers. Hungry for information on biological warfare, justice was postponed in the name of progress. The victims remained nameless while the research continued under new flags. The 1950s dawned with optimism and fear intertwined. Atomic energy promised a clean future. School children practiced hiding under desks. Hospitals filled with new machines born from wartime necessity, X-rays, antibiotics, dialysis, prosthetics. Each invention carried a dual soul, one part mercy, one part memory. Humanity was healing with tools forged in agony. In universities, young scientists studied the work of men whose names were whispered, not printed. They learned from discoveries without learning the cost. Equations stripped of their context became textbooks. The origin stories of vaccines, anesthetics, and flight dynamics were rewritten to sound heroic. The moral stains were quietly scrubbed away. Progress needed purity, and history was easy to clean when the dead could no longer speak. But truth has its own gravity. In 1957, as Sputnik circled the Earth, people looked up in wonder and unease. The same rockets that carried satellites could carry warheads. The same minds that gave us exploration had also perfected extermination. Science no longer belonged to humanity. Humanity belonged to science. Governments funded discoveries not to understand the world, but to control it.